Okay, thank you very much. Ladies and gents, great to have you back in here as we move to our final panel here of the day. We're talking about the impact of global digital economy on the funding and financing of smart cities and infrastructure. We have an esteemed panel who has joined us here on stage. We will be bringing them to you in a very short period of time. The panel, of course, have been considering some of the following elements here: global investment strategies for local applications and how these are changing, exploring funders and financiers' preferred investment models, financial instruments and more. And do new procurement strategies make a positive impact on encouraging innovation? Once again, we would like to engage you here in the audience, once again, with the voting app. So please, if you want to get hold of your phone, smart device, telephone or tablet, and we will get underway with some voting. So we have some questions for you, and the first of these is bankability of project is critical. So how effective are we engaging the financial institution prior to the execution of the project? We have options here. They are either not effective, moderately effective or very effective, and we will move through to the answers now. So here we go. Please answer these questions. Bankability of project is critical. How effective are we engaging the financial institution prior to execution of the project? Not effective, moderately effective or very effective. Three choices. Make your choice. You'll see how these answers impact our panel over the course of the next 80 minutes or so. Thank you very much indeed. Right, let's have a look at those results. Moderately effective. We've gone for the middle ground here. Very nice bell curve that we're showing at this point. Okay, let's move through. Let's go to our next question is here. Does our industry embrace innovative funding strategies? Yes or no? No. Does our industry embrace innovative funding strategy? Thank you very much indeed for the participation, and a big thank you, of course, to all of those who are joining us on the live stream from around the world. Great to have your company here too. Right, results for the second question. Let's have a look there.
I agree.
Okay, so does our industry embrace innovative funding strategies? 67% of us believe not. And our third question here in the poll, PPP is widely used in most advanced countries for project funding. In view of recent developments and experiences, does PPP have a future? Yes or no? Let's ask that question now. PPP widely used in most advanced countries for project funding. In view of recent developments and experiences, does PPP have a future? Last few seconds there. Thank you very much indeed for your participation. Let's have a look at the answers to that question. Does it still have a future? Yes, 83% overwhelmingly believing that yes, it does have a future. So with that in mind, let us move through into our panel itself, and we're welcoming our moderator to join us here at the podium. And our moderator for this session is the President and CEO of the Association of Consulting Engineering Companies of Canada. Ladies and gents, please put your hands together for our esteemed panel, as you can see them there on screen, and for our moderator today. Big round of applause, please.
Thank you very much. Before we begin, just an observation. I just want to do a shout out. He couldn't be with us this afternoon, but Bill Howard of the conference committee. My observation is that the content today has been particularly strong. It's been informative, relevant, and cohesive, and I just want to thank FIDIC for putting together the program. Throughout the day, we've heard a lot of themes about the accessibility of resources, very bold visions, and yet we're struggling with the fact that even within our own companies, we're trying to muster the resources. There's a willingness, but are the resources there? Is the know-how there? In terms of the projects themselves, well, we're looking at an infrastructure deficit where we don't even think there's a sufficient funding to maintain the current stock of infrastructure assets, and let alone the new build just to keep up with just bulk capacity. And then we're trying to get into the notion of smart infrastructure, doing things better, doing things more efficiently. Now, it will pay dividends in the long run, but how do we capitalize the money at the beginning? And there will always, as we heard earlier, and we've heard the references to financing sprinkled all the way through the discussions earlier today. And in fact, Gavin made a lot of my previous planned remarks a little bit irrelevant. It's a real challenge for us, and it's just getting that capitalization up front. Just an aside, not quite on this topic, but one of the solutions, of course, is that clients ought to pay you a lot more money than you, so raise your rates. So we have a great panel here that are going to be looking at it from a number of perspectives. I think the order of the speakers are just going to be as you see them here, from your right to left. And we're going to begin with Mark Worrell, who's the founder and CEO of Estates Infrastructure Exchange. He's a successful entrepreneur, which I hope engineers could embrace more entrepreneurial spirit. And he has background in capital markets, enterprise risk, and market data. He's an innovator in the area of private financing. And he has a unique vision. It's not just infrastructure as a stable, safe investment, but envisioning infrastructure as a tradable investment class, which is quite interesting. Ian Nightingale is a procurement advisor to the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank out of Beijing, and he came a long way here to be with us. Ian is an engineer for over 30 years of experience in procurement, and as I discovered at the reception yesterday, he's known to many of you. He stepped in for another speaker who is knighted, so he was asking if we can give him an honorary knighthood, and I think Nelson's Sir Dr. Nelson is actually authorized to do so. And I'll take one on the side as well. Susan Goranson, she's the Director for Municipal and Environmental Infrastructure Team at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and she has extensive experience in the finance sector. She has a master's degree in public policy from Harvard University Kennedy School of Government. And of course, Giorgio Moroni of Aon Spa in Italy. He's a member of the board and head of professional associations for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. He's been a thought leader in the area of risk for some 30 years. And also, thank you for being a sponsor of the conference. So, I think we're going to learn a lot here. We're going to get them all to speak first, and then we're going to try and get you involved with some questions. I know we've lost a few people over the break, but their projects will not be financed now. Yours will. So, with that, let's turn it over to Mark.
Thank you. Well done, John. Very good. To this, or?
Good.
Where's the mic? I don't need to use the terms. I use the... Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, John. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm very excited, actually, to have the opportunity to present this concept and business to you that we started a few years ago now, and we're getting to the point where we're starting to now move it into action. I'd just like to return to the question that's been posed for this panel, which is the questions asked what impact the global digital economy has on funding and financing of infrastructure. It's the digital piece that's the really interesting piece. I would like to argue that there has been very little impact from anything digital so far in this industry. But that's as yet to come. Let me just set the scene for a moment with 3 facts. At the moment, and I'm sure you've heard this throughout the conference in different numbers, there is $2 trillion funding gap a year and growing a backlog of projects that need money. And this is forecast to get worse. The second fact is the capital is already in the system. We don't need to go and find any more money, we just have to attract it to the construction projects that are here. $120 trillion of assets are under management within the financial industry, with institutions, and the current funding gap is less than 2% of that number. The third fact is that if you invest in infrastructure, there is a 20% increase in GDP, especially if you look at education. So it's a bit of a no-brainer for large funds and institutions to really invest in infrastructure. And you'd have thought that the mechanism would be there for us to be more successful, be able to attract that money. But that's not the case. As it stands, we have an inefficient marketplace. And economists would define that as pricing being very random. And I'll give you an example. I recently had a meeting with a major container port, and the CEO, who was looking to make the port, as many ports are trying to do at the moment, cleaner and greener, asked 9 institutions, banking institutions, to come along and present for the project in question. The result was that the money offered ranged from 2.5% per annum to 7.5% per annum. That's a 500 basis point spread, or 5% spread. That's a massive gap. So we have a problem which makes the market as inefficient, and the money doesn't flow directly into the market in any sensible way for the projects and the gap that we have in question. So maybe a digital approach may well act as a tool in the toolbox, or a catalyst to help more money to start flowing and allow us all to learn more about how we get money moving in a new way. It would make the market more efficient. And I think there are 4 main initiatives which we could look at introducing. The first of those is price transparency. We need a place or a platform where the price for a given risk can be priced correctly or done correctly. For example, you could include credit risk, whether that be for construction projects from S&P and Moody's, so we have the ratings begin to make a play, or for that matter, on existing projects or for maintenance. This will allow people to begin to understand the dynamics between risk and price more clearly for different asset classes in different locations. In the financial markets, this is not new. We've been doing this for a very long time, all the way back to the 18th century, for example, when the Buttonwood Tree Agreement was established, which was the precursor to the New York Stock Exchange, which led to price transparency. So there's plenty of background in terms of how this has been done in the past. We just have to find a way of applying it to infrastructure today. Secondly, we need to start using data more efficiently to be able to help investors understand and give them confidence to invest in infrastructure. I was with a construction company recently in London, and they told me that after 3 to 9 months, they throw away a lot of the construction information. In a data age, that seems like a bit of a sin, but it is going on. The lack of information at the moment means everyone is relying on the same historical information. And that drives money towards the same type of projects, typically standing assets, and particularly in developed countries. So that still leaves us with the problem, because we still want to build more projects. If data could be anonymized and pooled, which is done by many other companies, like, for example, Bloomberg or Thomson Reuters, which is part of my background, on a digital platform, we would have a huge resource that would allow us to create benchmarks, or indeed be able to create indices, which would allow us to run the risk, allow the risk to be better understood, and would therefore attract new investors. Maybe the owners of this data should get a discount on the next project. Now, that would be an innovative idea. Thirdly, we need to introduce liquidity. Create a secondary market. Make infrastructure into a tradable asset class. The fact there's no secondary market creates an illiquidity premium. We all pay too much for the project. This means investment decisions have to take longer to execute, because if you're investing over the long term, you're going to be even more careful, and there's no way out of the project. However, if there was a way out, you might be able to take a different view on risk. Lastly, we need diversification of risk for the private investor market, and we should allow funds to buy, for example, bonds and in tranches. Sorry, I lost my place there. Not have to invest in all of the large proportion of the project. This allows investors to create a portfolio according to the risk appetite they have. This diversification of digital marketplace will hopefully allow investors to consider investment in a whole range of projects with different risk profiles, closing the $2 trillion gap further. So how can we introduce these four mechanisms? Well, I would say this, but the simple answer is create a digital marketplace, an exchange, to start to help to bring the industry to learn a new way of financing. A single global infrastructure exchange that allows all types of investors to choose from a consistent flow of analysed, rated projects that can be bought in tranches and which can be sold whenever required. I look forward to all of your questions, so I'm sure I've raised a few there with you. Thank you very much.
Good.
So how do I advance the slides? Yeah. Just that one, yeah. Okay. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure to be here in Berlin. I was sort of asked at the last minute to come along and attend, but I've no hesitation. I've long association with FIDIC from an MDB perspective, having worked at the EBRD and the World Bank and now the AIB. And the discussions, I think, and presentations that I've seen today have been excellent, given that this is a really fairly new look at how we do smart projects. So from my perspective in MDB, we're a little shielded from the developments in the industry. It's been very interesting, very illuminating. So I'd like to thank the previous speakers for educating me on a lot of things that are going on in the world. We tend to be a little bit isolated, a little bit aloof maybe, I don't know. So what I'm going to do very quickly is to go through a couple of slides based on AIIB. I think we should have had a voting request as to who knows anything about the AIB. Or more importantly, what is the AIB? Because I'm sure that would have been interesting for me, the perspective of AIIB. Wherever you talk to people around the world, it's quite different and quite interesting. Some people say we are here, we've been established for the Belt and Road Initiative of China. Some people say we're just a straight China Development Bank, but we are in fact a truly established multilateral development bank. And if we look at these key features of the bank, this word 21st century multilateral development bank, that was the basis on which the bank was established. Why 21st century? Because although we have a DNA of the other banks that are existing, like the World Bank, EBRD, ADB, AFDB, we wanted to be different. And one of the things we're different, big thing, is we don't have a resident board. We do have a board, we're accountable to the board. And as of next year, we have a thing called the accountability matrix, which will mean that our presidents will in fact be making decisions on projects as submitted through an executive committee and an investment committee. So we are different. We're trying, the mantra that our president wants us to evoke is that we are lean, green and clean. For obvious reason, the lean is he wants to keep the organization in terms of costs well under control. That means we won't have a very tight number of people working, very professional from other institutions, private sector and public sector. Obviously the green is self-evident. We have a very strong green environmental mandate, and we also have a strong governance and transparency mandate. We were established in January 2016. We're AAA rated, and currently our capital base is 100 billion, and we currently have 20 billion in the bank at the moment. There's a growing need in the Asian region for infrastructure investment. We'll talk a bit more particularly about sustainable cities in a moment. And we're trying to address the infrastructure gap while adhering to environmental and social safeguards. This is, as I mentioned, very strong. This is just, don't once again try to read the small print, but we have 87 members, and it's not just in the region. It's all over the world. The dark kind of bluey colored part of the world is the region, which are regional members, but we have Canada as a member. We have a number of South American countries that are members. Ghana joined recently, I think 2 weeks ago. South Africa is a member, and most of Europe are members of the bank. So we're a truly global outfit. Our public sector operations, somewhat typical to the other MDBs, they're based on sovereign loans with a sovereign-based guarantee. I don't want to spend too much describing. Those who are familiar with MDBs, we're very similar in that respect. But we finance in some ways similar to the EBRD. We can open to financing national and subnational entities, SOEs, and some hybrid structures. There's one big difference between ourselves and the World Bank. We have no budgetary program or reform lending. That means we don't go into a project with conditionalities regarding how the government should introduce development changes to the way they structure their legislation, their tariff setting, so on. It must be an infrastructure, the investment, or other productive assets, which we're in the process of defining, and a cement plant would be a good one to start with, not directly related to infrastructure, but a productive asset related to infrastructure. Our financing is on commercial terms, but we publish on our sovereign-based financing that we have an established pricing structure, which is available on our website for those to see. We have a technical assistance of over $150 million. This is a fund to help our clients prepare projects. And as the last bullet point says, we are very keen to focus very strongly on integrity, technical and economic analysis, legal, cost benefit and procurement aspects, which is my particular area, as well as the financial, environment and social risk. On our private sector operations, we operate very similarly to the EBRD. Once again, we can finance subnational entities, SOEs, private sector companies, PPPs. There must be infrastructure-based or productive assets, and it's a typical or traditional project financing that the project itself must be able to pay for the financing of the project. And we perform private sector banking style due diligence. The only downside at the moment is that we can only lend in US dollars, but we hope to be able to lend next year in other currencies, probably the RMB or euro. This is giving us a particular problem at the moment because one of our biggest members is Iran. So we can't do anything in Iran with the current situation, with the financing. Operational strategy, we have three key areas that we focus on: transport, energy, and we'll be talking in a bit more detail, sustainable cities. Cross-thematic priorities, sustainable infrastructure, cross-country connectivity, and private capital mobilization. So let's spend a few minutes on sustainable and smart cities. We've just launched a strategy, I think as Gavin English mentioned, on sustainable, which is up for public consultation, and when we're hoping that people respond with some ideas, views, comments. It's on our website. As we've heard from a number of speakers already, there's tremendous urbanization in Asia at the moment. As you can see from this slide, 340 million up to 225 and 1.2 billion by 2050. Here's another McKinsey graph. I haven't given them credit for it, but it is McKinsey's graph. But just shows you the relative difference between some of the areas that are growing, but Asia is by growing far the most. The other aspect we're concerned about is the impact of climate change. Asia has been more affected by climate change than other regions in the world. 1 billion people in Asia will be affected by 2050. If you look at that table on the right, you can see that some of the countries in our region are in the top countries most affected by extreme weather events. Our strategy on sustainable cities is probably we will prefer the holistic infrastructure approach, and it can be categorized into the three areas of enhanced urban mobility, improve basic infrastructure and city resilience, and promote integrated development. On those three, just to expand a little bit, in terms of enhancing urban mobility, we're talking about metro, light rail, trams, buses, low carbon infrastructure, electric cars, etc., pedestrian, and multimodal hubs. Streets, we focus on streets and urban roads. In terms of basic infrastructure and city resilience, we have to address areas like I mentioned. We have looking at flooding is a key problem in a lot of areas. The impact of, say, a tsunami. I'm doing a project at the moment in Jakarta where we have to figure out what happens to this small town in the event of a tsunami. There are tsunami escape roads. They're widening the roads to make it easy to get out. So these are some of our considerations. And also we're promoting integrated development. So that's including things like green buildings, industrial parks, special economic zones, urban redevelopment. Very broad picture. We could spend a lot of time talking. But I think one of the key things that's coming out is that we do have a lot of opportunities for taking on board innovative and technological solutions. Some of them mentioned on the slide there. We're looking at smart grids, metering, environmental metering, signaling, lighting, and e-road pricing, all with E in front of it. So I haven't repeated it, but we look at that. But there are some concerns that in that term, which I'll come to at the end of the presentation. So this is our vision to support the cities in Asia to be, Gavin mentioned this GREAT, the acronym is GREAT, meaning green, resilient, efficient, accessible, and thriving. These are the key things. We see ourselves as we have a long-term aspiration. We want to be a trusted banker. Who trusts bankers? Trust us. In providing financing solutions for cities. So we have a two role. We have a provide financing solutions, and it's not just financing solutions ourselves. We work with other institutions, other MDBs, private financiers. We have a range of financing products that we can bring to bear on these integrated solutions. And the ultimate aim is to turn these cities to enable them to have this great cities. I mean that in the terms of the acronym. So I'm going through this very quickly. There's such a lot to talk about here, but I'm limited to conscious that I've got a big clock in front of me which keeps going down. So I just want to cover. The last thing I really wanted to come to was that I think there are three challenges for people like us in our industry, in financing cities, particularly in Asia, is that it's all very well having smart technology, but you've got to have a stable and resilient digital infrastructure. Some of the cities I visit and some of the countries have very weak digital infrastructure, Wi-Fi, broadband, that kind of thing. And it's immediately impacted if there's a major climatic incident, such as an earthquake or volcano eruption, so on. So this is a key area for me in terms of looking at the opportunities for smart insertion into projects. I could spend another 3 hours on procurement, but I won't, because you'll probably... I could do a presentation at the gala dinner tonight, maybe. That'll liven it up. But the one thing I want to reassure you is that the MDBs have a bit of a reputation of sort of being behind the kind of things that you guys are talking about here. We just had MDB Heads of Procurement Forum, which was hosted by the AIB in Beijing. And one of the topics we looked at, and because we were looking at each other, what does it mean? Innovation, disruptive technology. So what I'm pleased to report to you is that we're talking about it now. So as these things develop, we're not going to be in a position where we get a project and somebody says, yeah, but this is disruptive technology. How do we procure it? And also all the MDBs have changed their procurement rules to have a more flexible principle-based procurement, which should make procurement of innovative and smart solutions a little bit easier than it was, say, 15, 20 years ago, when it was sort of one-stop-fits-all type procurement, regardless of what it was technologically speaking. So I think there's hopefully that's an area that we should be keeping up with the developments. One other last view, and here I'll finish, is that I also, as an engineer, I worry generally about maintenance when we talk about roads and so on. But if we're going to have smart technology, I think it's a key component that where you have smart technology, that there's a real focus on the maintenance of that technology. You can't just install it and then fire and forget and walk away, because if this stuff stops working for some reason, a power issue, or just it's not tough enough for the task, then there's no point in fitting it. The advantages you get from the smart technology make it very difficult to get the benefits in a long-term sustainable environment. So I'll leave it at there. As I said, there was a lot I could have talked about. I could have said a lot more, but I see that I'm overrun by a couple of minutes, so please forgive me. Thank you very much for your attention.
Ian, I think you're a little bit like me. If you ask me about infrastructure, it's like trying to get a glass of water out of a fire hydrant.
Yeah.
Okay.
I need to talk into this mic. Okay, you don't have to. Okay. In which way?
I'd like to thank the organizers. I'm very glad to be here. I have to acknowledge and to disclose that I am not an engineer. I am a banker. Please don't hiss. But I'm glad to be here to talk about financing of smart infrastructure from the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development point of view, EBRD. And I'd also like to thank Ian, because some of his presentation did sort of enable me to speed through mine, because you've said there's so many similarities between our organizations. But anyway, just let me, and my presentation will basically, I will walk through just an introduction of who EBRD is, and then after that I will describe what we're doing on the municipal side, and then some of the challenges that we face in trying to finance smart projects. So EBRD, briefly, it's a AAA international financial institution that was founded in 1991 after the fall of the Berlin Wall to support the development of sustainable, well-functioning market economies. We're predominantly owned by governments as well as two intergovernmental institutions, that's the European Union and the European Investment Bank. We have a capital base of 30 billion. Where we invest, here's our geographic footprint. Given our history, we've been predominantly working in Central and Eastern Europe as well as the former Soviet Union, but other countries we're active in now include Mongolia, Turkey, Greece, Cyprus, as well as the region we refer to as Southern and Eastern Mediterranean, which includes Egypt, Morocco, Jordan, Lebanon, Tunisia, Gaza, and West Bank area. We're the largest investor in the region. Basically, we have a portfolio of 40 billion, and now I'd like to move to the municipal and environmental infrastructure team. And this is the team that basically works to finance cities, municipal-owned companies, local authorities, as well as private sector that has been awarded a concession on a competitive basis in the delivery of essential infrastructure services. Our portfolio is 4.3 billion, and it covers a wide array of sectors, which includes water, wastewater, which is the largest sector we're active in, followed by urban transport, then solid waste, district heating and district cooling, and facilities management. And just for the audience, facility management for us is basically we will invest in the buildings for hospitals, education, social infrastructure, but we provide the infrastructure, the facility, and leave the delivery of the education, delivery of the health service to the public authorities. EBRD is fortunate because we can provide a wide range of financing instruments, which can range from sovereign-backed loans to municipal loans, quasi-corporate utility loans, as well as loans to the private sector. So we can provide the instrument that's best designed to suit the project. Along with the types of loans that we can provide, we can also mobilize technical assistance as well as capital grants. Technical assistance can be used for project preparation, project implementation, as well as such things as stakeholder engagement, corporatization, commercialization. And most recently, we have started in the municipal team to support cities develop green city action plans. And these are plans to help a city to benchmark baseline where they are and to determine where they want to go to address their environmental challenges. And key to these action plans are also to explore whether smart solutions can help a city as they make this journey. So basically, the context of EBRD's interest in smart cities, as the other speakers have said, the increase in urbanization, as well as digitalization, has meant that smart and green solutions are becoming a more practical way to help a city address their challenges. So EBRD has determined a way for us. We've come up with a definition for smart, and there's a lot of definitions for smart. And if you talk to most mayors, they will say, yes, I want my city to be a smart city. But how we define it is that basically using data analytics and the Internet of Things to improve the reliability, the efficiency, and quality of municipal services. Now, when we start to talk to cities about smart, everybody wants to be smart, but when you dig deeper, there's a lot of, they only have vague notions of where they want to go, and also of what is the governance and policy requirements, as well as for data management that they need to have if they're going to embark on becoming a smart city. At EBRD, we're trying to work with cities to help mobilize technical assistance to help cities develop smart city action plans. And what would this include? First of all, a city needs to do a baseline assessment of where they are. What do they want to achieve? But also they need to, as Ian mentioned, they need to assess what is the digital platform that they can work on. From there, what we feel is very important in any city as they develop their smart strategy is that, first of all, to have lots of stakeholder engagement, to include the population in this discussion, but also to ensure that you have open data platforms, because this can allow greater innovation by third parties who can develop apps to support the city. It's very important to have the anonymization of data, and also to ensure that all smart investments pass a public benefit test. So EBRD can assist clients in these developing a smart city strategy, but also in developing the project, as well as project implementation and institutional strengthening, as well as can provide market financing. Now, what are some of the challenges that we see for SMART? And as I said, my definition of SMART is a bit smaller, but here we see there is a very small size. Some of these projects are very small in size, and also that there is a lot of times, because the technology is not proven or it's new, it can be seen as a high risk. And also the changing technology, also technological complexity, and also sometimes the cities need guidance on where they want to go and how to choose a model. Now, what can EBRD do to support cities in this way? First of all, as I've mentioned before, we can lend on a variety of structures. We can lend either to public entities or private entities. For small investments, we can bundle them together, and I can give you an example of one of those. And also, we can support cities to ensure that their procurement strategy is the right one for where they're trying to go. Now, here's some examples of what EBRD has achieved, has invested in. The first project I'd like to talk about is the Vinnytsia Automated Fare Collection investment, which is in Ukraine. It was an $8 million loan that we signed in 2015. And the key thing of this, it was prior to this investment, the city had a cash-based collection for its urban transport, which meant that they were not collecting all of the money that they were hoping to collect. So by implementing an automated fare collection, this will result in overall improvement in the efficiency of the public transport sector, as well as what we see as considerable environmental benefits. But what's unique about this project, in addition to the technological innovation, is that we introduced a design, build, maintain contractual structure, which was new for the Ukrainian market. This is an example of a small project which EBRD bundled together to provide financing. And this is a company, Javna, which is a Slovenian company which had invested in small municipal street lighting projects, which then they were using through the Internet of Things through managing them. However, how the company had financed these projects is all through short-term loans, but they needed more money to enable them to continue to invest in new projects. And all of these investments were through energy performance contracts. So what EBRD did is that we came up with we basically refinanced their short-term loans with long-term funds to enable them to continue to invest in the market. And this, the energy performance contracting results in considerable savings for the smaller municipalities. I will say this was a very challenging project for us from an implementation point of view, just for monitoring, because the company has something like 15 contracts in very small cities. So the monitoring, getting the data is quite challenging, but this is something that we felt as part of EBRD's mantra to support the development of the private sector in the delivery of infrastructure. And finally, the last project I'd like to talk about is a technical assistance project, a PPP, to support a PPP in the city of Amman. Now, Amman's population has grown dramatically as a result of the refugee crisis in Syria, and as a result of that, there also has been increased congestion. So Amman, at the same time, is also looking to install LED street lighting. But installing this LED street lighting, they're not just looking to increase the livability and brightness of the city. They also want to reconfigure the city streets to also address other challenges that they face. And that would be to have the street lights, the poles, to also have public Wi-Fi, which would enable them to better monitor traffic flow, accident detection, and also to support parking, perhaps identification. And the view is that they should be able to sell advertisement through this LED, through the platform that they would put up, which would result in an additional source of revenue to help service the debt. So similar, not exactly, but it is a new way of financing in line with what some of the earlier speakers were talking about. This summarizes, in a nutshell, what EBRD is doing. I do believe that, as the earlier speakers have said, the world is becoming increasingly more urbanized, and as more people live together, we need to come up with smart and green solutions. And there's a lot of challenges available, but I also feel that the IFIs, like EBRD, our colleagues at the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, as well as other MDBs, are there and willing to work with our clients, the engineering world, as well as the private sector to deliver this infrastructure. Thank you very much.
You know, it's good to know there's all these great financing opportunities. Then, of course, a risk walks into the picture.
Yes, yes. Good afternoon. Thanks, John, for your introduction. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a banker. But I used to work with engineers, and you certainly know that the risk management and insurance are very important ancillary services for each consulting firm. The subject of my speech are threats and risks and how to deal with this. Let's start talking about the growth of the cities, which is impressive. The video you have seen talks about this. But cities are also location of threats and risks that should be possible forecasted or if something happens, mitigated. Human pandemics, floods, cyber attacks, all these cases seem to be acts of God or crime, but you cannot exclude that a human error is involved. The growing number of catastrophes is not only due to natural events over which we have no control. They are not only the result of fate. Something can be planned, at least to prevent or mitigate the consequences of the losses. And sometimes the consequences of the losses are worsened by errors and omission of projects and designs. Let's see now 4 cases where professional errors are involved, and these are cases, of course, on the front page of the press. The first case is the Tower of Pilots of the Port of Genova, which was opened in 1997. After 16 years, a vessel during maneuvers in the port area struck the tower to collapse, causing 7 deaths and many injured. After 5 years, we have still many possible causes, and among them, design flaw of the location. So, the engineer who projected the construction is involved in a lawsuit after more than 20 years after the delivery of the project. The questions are, is the engineer firm still existing and duly covered with full retroactivity? And if not, is the retired designer duly covered with enough discovery period? We don't know. The second case is the Archive of Cologne, which is the largest municipal archive. Built in 1971, the archive collapsed in 2009 with estimated damage of about 1-2 billion euros. A faulty structural analysis of an underground concrete wall was brought up as a possible cause. Same question like in the first case. The third case, Grenfell Tower, one of the worst cases. Built in 1974, in 2016, a new cladding system, aluminium composite material panels with a polyethylene core and a PIR foam insulation, was installed over the original concrete facade in an effort to improve the building energy, efficiency, and appearance. But this has led to a disaster. Fire started on the 4th floor in a refrigerator which burned through windows and spread throughout the structure, resulting in the loss of 72 lives. The tower is considered a total loss. The cause, the new cladding system, dangerously flammable and unlawful according to the UK Building Code. Last case, the most recent case, the cable-stayed bridge in Genoa called Ponte Morandi. Assume you know everything about this. Length more than 1,100 meters, material reinforced concrete, last 14th of August. 43 dead people. Insufficient maintenance and reinforcement of cables, but also poor choice of construction materials are brought up as possible causes of the collapse. All the engineers involved in the control procedures, together with the public and private entities responsible of the concession, are currently under investigation. Same question as in the other cases, but let me add one more issue. I refer to the first speech, first presentation, today's presentation, very important, interesting presentation by McKinsey. What if digital instruments had been applied to the artifact to certain the level of progressive subsidence, could have prevented and avoid a disaster? Maybe. How the insurance market can support the engineers, firms, and the infrastructure trading platform worldwide? The insurance market can assist in managing risks and gaining access to capital, of course, to mitigate risk-based financial volatility arising from design and construction professional services. The main coverage are general liability, builder risk coverage, and workers' compensation. To cover not only bodily injuries or property damages, but also damages caused by sudden and accidental causes, it's essential to be covered under environmental liability coverage and overall the professional liability coverage, including negligent design or other errors in the performance of professional services. So the professional liability insurance is an essential need. Let's talk just a moment of Europe. In Europe we have a directive 2009 stating that the professional indemnity should be compulsory in each and every, across the European countries. But not all the countries have applied this directive. In any case, worldwide, main contractors ask the consulting engineering firm to be covered with larger and larger limits. Let's say that insurance market is able to offer to the consulting engineers different models of insurance, of PI insurance, depending on the local legislation. Just to make two examples, we have cases in Germany, in Austria, and in many in the other East Europe countries where by law the professional indemnity coverage should be offered on act committed basis, where the claim is the fact, the damage. And in the rest of Europe, and I would say in the rest of the world, the insurance, the PI coverage is offered on a claim-made basis. In this case, the claim is not damage, but is the request of damage from the third party damage. So, I hope you have appreciated the facts and ideas that can help to maintain the focus on how to prevent and mitigate threats and risks, and I would say generates a sort of cooperation between us. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. We're going to do a hard stop at 6 because it's been a long day for a lot of us, and I need at least 45 minutes to do up my bow tie. But I do want to. When we get in position with the microphones, I would like to start us off with an observation and maybe get a response from each of you. When private financing first came on the scene, and you got in front of a group like this, there was a lot of discussion around contractual risk. Last November, I attended Nelson's CEO conference. Why was I there? I invited myself. But he made me moderate a panel on risks around private investment PPPs. Not a word about contracts. It was all about the risk of obsolescence. And all we've heard all day is how quickly things are changing, and the universe is changing faster than we can keep up. So, given that most PPPs, most private financing, most of these joint ventures are relationships that last longer than my first marriage. How do we manage that in this rapid changing world? When we're looking at 15, 20, 25 years for the investors to see a return on investment. Or the public client simply using PPPs as a means to amortize their costs over 25 years. How do you deal with that from each of your perspectives? That the technology that was the basis of the contract, the basis of the bid, could be completely obsolete inside of 5 years in a 25-year commitment to the owner?
I can start. EBRD has financed several of the hospital, actually I think 7 of the hospital PPPs in Turkey. These are facility management PPPs, as I mentioned in my talk earlier. So EBRD is financing the delivery of the building, the parking, and the facilities manager will basically, keep the building clean, provide catering services, but they will not deliver the health care. They will also, though, provide imaging, some sort of radiological testing, this type of thing. But in the PPP documentation, there is a market test that after 5 years, the Ministry of Health is able to request changes to the contract, which would also result in compensation for the facilities manager to introduce further technological innovation. And, my view as a banker that if the contractual documentation, if it's not robust, it's very difficult to get financing that is going to be, competitive. Because if you don't have strong documentation, it's very challenging for the bankers to come up with pricing that is going to enable the long-term, generation of this asset. And I think one of the criticisms sometimes of the PPPs, particularly by governments, is that they're too expensive. And I think one of the reasons they are expensive is because sometimes the contractual relationships undermining them, the PPP agreements are not as robust as they should be. The risk-reward transfer is not accurate. So I would say that it is doable, but you need strong, robust contractual framework and underpin the investment.
Ian, would you have a similar response, or do you have a different point?
Well, obviously with a similar background to Sue, we have even in the AIB, and we're relatively young, we have some new contracts of PPPs that we're asking to be financed, and the same issue. I mean, not necessarily technology related, but the long-term risk. You have to have that ability at some stage to say, wait a minute, where are we? Is it going well? Is it not going well? What are we going to do going forward? And that boils down to the nature of the contracting and the agreement that you have on the PP that you're going to finance. I think, I'm sure remember the great Hungarian M5 toll. I shouldn't remind about that, but that was a classic case.
It's not a success story.
That wasn't a success story, but it was one of these things where, this is not about the technology issue. It's more about a long-term relationship that started to go wrong. The traffic that was supposed to be there wasn't there. The company started losing money. There was issues about whether or not it should be renationalized. And that was because nobody figured out at the time that they were going to have the kind of problems they did. But when they got them, they just had to rethink it. The money was made available and they move on. I think technology is more important than anything. If you're going to have technology that maybe is new, you don't know, it's coming in, it looks good, it's going to save money, but I think you've got to hold a kind of hold your breath clause, sort of maybe 5-10 years into the process where you look at it and say, is this really working? Is this delivering the benefits? And if it isn't, what's the mechanism by driving it forward? I don't think in any of these PPPs you can sit down and put your feet up and think this is going to go well and we're all going to make money. There's always going to be something, I think.
Mark, envisioning the tradable asset aspect of it, I guess one of the suggestions is it will be for some agility in the market. So through that lens, is this kind of rapid turnover, the fear of obsolescence, is this something that's going to make tradable assets more attractive, or is it something that's going to buckle up and make it a little more tough for the faint of heart?
So I think one of the things a marketplace can bring is also innovation of further product. So at the moment we're looking very much at a single loan or a single way of financing that, and it tends to be over the very long term. The idea behind being able to do it through an exchange as a tradable bond means that you can also produce, if you've got enough liquidity, and that's the key component obviously for us, if you've got enough liquidity you can start to have options. You can create options, for example, on projects, and you could start to hedge them. So people could take the financing risk but actually could begin to hedge them over the medium or short term, depending on their view of the technology or any other thing. Absolutely, the contracts are key, even when we're doing the due diligence in the same way as any banker would do it. But obviously time changes, and everything changes as you move forward, and so the ability to hedge it would enable to change the price of the asset. And people could take an opposing view. You could have a short seller versus a long seller, etc. So the idea of making it into a tradable asset class means that you can absorb more risk and have different investors in the market.
Well, I'm feeling better, but let's ask the insurer just to be sure.
I'm going to rely on Aon to do the insurance thing.
Yeah. From an insurance perspective, how do we handle the risk of rapid turnover technology and the risk of obsolescence in projects?
Yes, in my opinion, this could be, as I tried to tell before, this is an ancillary service that can be, should be approached just at the very beginning of each and every negotiation, of each and every business. Because I've talked about general liability, but we should think also to the contractual liability. So when a possible business arises, this should be approached also on this basis. And insurance market is able also to offer insurance products able to prevent also financial risks. So in my opinion, the insurance market could be approached at the very beginning of each and every negotiation.
All right, do we have some questions from the floor? And I'll seek Greg's help since you're all backlit.
Hello, I'm Carla Molen. I work also as a chairperson for a big pension fund in the Netherlands. And we invest in infrastructure projects worldwide. And we are quite successful. We have a high return on investment. But what is our biggest concern is that other investors, bankers, or other pension funds will take over the whole infrastructure team because we are successful and there's a huge competition between the talents, the talentful teams. And I would like to ask Mark Worrell, he was talking about create a digital marketplace, but what I see in my practical work is that there's a huge competition. And how do you look to this phenomenon?
Thank you. Well, I guess what we have seen ourselves is since last September when we opened the doors for business was about £12 billion worth of projects. And we filtered that down to about 5 billion, and the first 2 billion is going through the exchange right now. The answer is that we reach out to the market for that talent. So we don't try and build everything in-house. So we work with people like Turner & Townsend, we work with people like IHS Markit and others to provide the professional opinion, and we spread that both between the capital markets and the other people around the market. So we're not trying to draw all the talent into the exchange. The exchange is a marketplace which draws on the talent of the market. So that's how we would address that. So if you've got a particular strength alongside IB Development Bank, EBRD, or whatever it might be, and you co-invest, what we're trying to offer is the ability for you to have a wider spread of investment for whatever risk appetite you have. Does that answer your question?
Right. Mark, if I can just pick up on that question, just a follow-up to that. Can you explain whether your exchange is actually for greenfield or brownfield or both? And in each case, what process do you go through, and at what point do you have your intervention? And is there any size to the sort of transaction you would do?
So we prefer to start at the $50 million range. So we're sliding hopefully below the investment banking range. The process is on our website. It's probably, I don't want to bore you with a process right now, but it's there if you want to ask me questions afterwards. But fundamentally, it's a due diligence up front, as the bankers will do, and then you have a risk assessment, which is done more broadly before it is brought to market in the usual way through a prospectus that lays out the risk. And then we have an underwriting facility that guarantees the placement, in addition to obviously going directly to the market to try and attract the money into it. It's for brownfield and greenfield, yeah. We're agnostic as to whether we do construction, stabilization, refinance. We want as much risk as possible so you can diversify it.
Good evening. I'm Francesco Fiermonte from the Italian Association of Engineers. I have a question. In this rapidly changing world, the life cycle of structure or an infrastructure is key to its maintenance. When you refer to the Morandi Bridge in Genova, that bridge had obviously got to the end of its life cycle because it was subject to pressures that were not the same in the 60s than in 2018. So I'm addressing the banks. How do you include the fact that an infrastructure today in a rapidly changing world will have to be substituted in a very short period, and the cost of the substitution could actually be included in the project? This, by the way, is a concern which is covered by BIM 5, which takes into account the final stage of the infrastructure, and it's the fact that it's going to have to be changed and replaced. Thank you.
I can start just saying that at EBRD, when we look at a project, we spend a lot of time evaluating, the life cycle of that project, and also sort of, are we designing this infrastructure for the current population, or are we taking into account potential population growth? For instance, Ian and I, when Ian was at EBRD, we financed the St. Petersburg flood protection barrier. And at that point in time, it was designed probably, we were criticized that it had been over-designed. But actually, in the face of climate change and more variable weather patterns, actually it was designed appropriately. So that's one point. I think the other point is the focus on operational and maintenance. And both for public sector and private sector clients, we look at this very carefully. And one challenges that we see for PPPs and that we try to address through technical assistance is a lot of times there's a bit of a David and Goliath relationship between the city or the government, which is providing the concession, and the concessionaire. The concessionaire frequently has done other projects. They have teams of lawyers who are familiar looking at the contractual documentation, whereas there may be less capacity at the government side. So what we tried to do to address this risk and to ensure that the government, which is providing the concession, is able to appropriately monitor that the O&M that should be done is being done, is to provide capacity building so that we could enhance the ability of the government to monitor the performance of the private sector, the concessionaire, and to see that they are indeed delivering on the services and providing the ongoing operation and maintenance.
Hannah Vickers, I'm Chief Exec of ACE in the UK, so taken over from Nelson. My question is in relation to manufactured solutions. So we've heard a lot earlier today around how we should increase our productivity. Now, if we move to off-site manufacturing, I just wanted to ask what do you think the role of finance and insurance is in actually helping that investment? So you invest at a portfolio level rather than on an individual project where it doesn't make sense to start up a manufactured solution just for that one project.
I can say from EBRD's perspective, we probably would continue, at least initially, at least to start out, we would probably focus on the project basis. But I think the attribute there is you get the delivery of the infrastructure so much quicker. For public sector transactions, what we see is a lot of times it can take 3 to 5 years for the project to be completed. So if you have a manufactured solution, what I would see, for instance, with respect to wastewater treatment plants, if you can have, a mobile or, the manufactured wastewater treatment plant just delivered to the site and they just turn it on, that would result in a much faster implementation period. It is something, though, it's also fair to say that EBRD would consider investing in these types of infrastructure providers as well, dependent on there being a sufficient pipeline and demand for the products.
Yeah, I think the same would apply to the AIB. We talk about manufactured solutions. We've done some recent on some power units that were going into a port, where the units are purchased and they're erected, but they're all built ready to go. And the beauty from a banking perspective is that you know what you're getting, when you're getting, rather than taking the risk of, say, building something on site to meet the requirement. You know it's a bolt-on, so it's quick. So from a banking perspective, I think it's quite an attractive investment, knowing how long it's going to last for. And also, so I don't know whether that's what you're alluding to, but also financing companies that have these solutions, that want to say, we can look at that from, if there's a company that's in our operational regions, within the Asian region, that is manufacturing a solution which believes that it has a prospect of being sold throughout the region, we can finance the company on a private sector basis. So, I think this is a very positive, from a bank's perspective, investment.
Mm-hmm. Well, if nature abhors a vacuum, I'll jump in again. I should warn you, I'm a big advocate of Boyle's law. For those of you who remember thermodynamics, under constant temperature and pressure, I'll expand to fill any volume available, which I suppose makes me a noble gas. The engineer got it.
Bankers haven't got a clue.
Conferences like this, we all want to take something away. And at the risk of oversimplifying a fairly complex issue, there's a lot of competition. No matter the great work the banks are doing and the innovation we're seeing in terms of different products out there, the reality is that there's much more infrastructure need than there is available financing. So these people attending this conference, they're going to go back to their firms and they're going to have to advocate for their clients on how to get their projects funded. So what is the inspirational slogan that they're going to put up on over their desk that are the magic words that are going to make you want to support their project over their competitor's project?
Well, from our perspective, actually I would probably disagree with that. I think the money is in the system. I think what you have to do, as I said earlier when I made my speech, you have to find a way of getting risk assessed correctly. And that risk assessment, if you have it in an open marketplace as a tool in the toolbox, I'm not saying obviously the IB and the EBRD and everyone else and the other bankers have their place in the system, as do the asset managers. But there is a piece of finance that is not happening, And that piece of finance needs to be attracted, or it has to be priced at risk, but it can be diversified. So if you want to buy, if John was going to lend me, I don't know, £100, he might be prepared to lose it. But if he was going to lend me £10,000, he might start thinking about it and want to get to know me a little better. So my point is, but if I ask the whole panel to lend me £10,000, after this experience, they might actually be more prepared to do it. The point is that you need a diversification into that asset class, into that construction project to allow that to happen. And our contention is that we can make that happen so we can actually get more money into the system by actually attracting the syndic or putting the syndication together that makes it happen.
Yeah. I think one of the things I have to do often is what they call business outreach presentations, saying, you know, what we have to offer, how you do business with us, and so on. And one of the things I find incredible sometimes is people think they could just knock on the front door of, say, the AIB and say, I've got this great project going ahead, which is fine, but you have to understand what that bank is there to do. What is it financing? You know, what specific sectors is it involved in? You heard from my presentation, we're transportation and energy, okay? There's no point in coming to us with a project that sounds great, but it doesn't meet our strategic ambitions as financiers. So you have to build a case that says, this is what we do, and this is what they like to finance, rather than sometimes people come with great ideas which actually aren't relevant. So I would say, you know, just one part of this, it's not the solution, is that be aware of what it is you're trying to sell or what you're trying to get financing for, and target it. Don't just say, I've got a great idea and the bank will give me money. Some banks might, I don't know, but you know, we have a particular thing, because at the end of the day, what you have to understand is that we have to present these projects to our board. And our board will be looking at our environmental strategies, our transport strategies, our financing principles, and they will question us, why are we financing this? And, you know, in our case, it's strong on environment, for example. Strategic sustainable cities is going to be a big thing for us in the future. So these are the kind of projects, if you want to come to us for financing, that you've got to be aware of, that's what we do. And I'm sure Sue has the transition impact. I don't know whether it's still going at the EBRD, but the transition impact is a key thing. How does it?
Qualities.
All right, okay. So what I guess the message is, understand, it's like when you're selling something, understand that if you're going to need the financing when you come to, certainly MDBs, you know, and it's maybe different from private sector financiers, but for MDBs, we have a set of rules that when we look at a project, you know, it has to meet our you know, the reason, you know, raison d'etre, it has to, why we're here, that's what we do. And then it becomes successful. Unfortunately, some people just think they're going to knock on the door and say, I've got a great idea, give us $100 million. And sometimes it's not that easy.
Okay, let's try this bank then.
I agree with Ian. If someone approaches EBRD and the project is not in line with our mandate, it's impossible for us to provide financing. For instance, we cannot finance anything related to the military. So if someone would come and say, the military is your partner, it's not the kind of, you know, we can't finance a military barracks, even if it does make a lot of economic sense. But I would say, in addition to Ian's theme that, you know, the project has to be in line with the raison d'etre of the bank, the other element that I see is a lot of very great ideas that are poorly prepared. And this is a group of engineers, design people, and you know, this is where a lot of emphasis needs to go. So a lot of times we see projects that look good, but the feasibility study may be only focused on the technical side as opposed to the economic side and the environmental side. So you need a feasibility study, project preparation that looks at the project from an environmental, an operating, financial, technical point of view, and to demonstrate that it is robust. And this is something that the banks need. EBRD, and I think almost all the IFIs are aware of this, and that is why almost all of them now have project preparation facilities, not just for public sector projects, but also for private sector projects, because the other frustration is a lot of times you see a very good PPP where, as I was saying before, the risk reward isn't right in the contractual structure. So as a result, it's not bankable. So I would say strong, robust project preparation can help Anscott find these very important infrastructure projects?
Nothing else to say. Of course, we are very interested to the development of this industry, and we are able maybe to support this. Thanks very much.
Well, it certainly seems in this changing world there's still a lot of interest in getting behind projects. If we do our due diligence, if we faced the changing technology face down, we're prepared to look at new products and new ways of doing business, and I think that's been a recurring theme throughout this conference thus far. So we're almost at 6 o'clock, so maybe we'll just wrap it up a minute or two early, so I'll be your favorite moderator of the whole conference and give you the gift of time. Thank you to our speakers.
Very good moderator.
Thank you very much indeed to our esteemed panel joining us here on stage, Mark Worrell, Ian Nightingale, Susan Granson, and Mr. Giorgio Moroni, ably led by Mr. John Gamble. Thank you very much indeed to our panel here once again. Huge thanks. Actually, a round of applause is probably necessary as well.
But apart from that,
So this has brought us to the end of a fabulous first day. We've had a wide range of presenters joining us up here on stage. We started out earlier this morning with the future of infrastructure demand and development with Dr. Gernot Struber, and it was a great start looking at some of the statistics around the industry and the challenges and the opportunities that are available to us. Nelson's panel with perspectives from the boardroom gave us a good look across at the C-level, the C-suite, across the industry as well. One of the major aspects coming out, of course, is the aspect of diversity, and we're still certainly a long way from the sweet spot in terms of that, but I'm sure that as an industry we're all working towards the where we want to be. Impact of digital technology on mobility and business was the next phase there. Greg Bentley from Bentley Systems and Javier Baldor joining us from BST Global. One of the strong elements coming out of that was we need to embrace change. We need to look at our opportunities in the digital space and be bold and be fearless in terms of moving forward. The City of Today and Tomorrow was presented to us around the challenges and some of the options, some of the very innovative elements that are happening right now. But as we've seen with the polling that we're looking at doing, the positivity, I think, needs a little bit of a boost across the industry as well to take us forward. And we've just heard, of course, from the aspects of financing and funding in our panel here at this point. So a wonderful day all in all, and of course that leads us beautifully into a wonderful night. We have the FIDIC Gala Dinner and Awards coming up. It's going to be happening here in this room, and it will look very different the next time we see this room here. So what we're going to do is release you at this point. From here you have the opportunity to head away, and we'll be seeing you back at 7:30 p.m. tonight out in the foyer for pre-dinner drinks before we enter into this room and we find out who has received the awards here this evening. Thank you very much indeed for your attention over the course of the day. Thanks to our audience worldwide. Thank you very much indeed. We'll see you a little later on tonight.